What's up, Mets fans? It is January 3rd, and you are now listening to another episode of the True Mets Talk podcast. It is the Mets Cold Stove Update Edition. Not much news or rumors surrounding the New York Mets in the last couple of days ever since I dropped my last podcast episode talking about JD Martinez and Gio Urshela. But it is a new year, so happy new year to you all. I hope you enjoyed the festivities with your friends and loved ones. We are here to talk about a little bit more of a subjective and a little bit more of a fun topic that is Pete Alonso and the upcoming contract extension talks between the Mets and Pete Alonso. So before we get into that, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that thumbs up, support the podcast. I thoroughly appreciate it. And comment your thoughts and opinions. I understand this is not a one size fits all sort of podcast episode. It's not a one size fits all topic. So there's going to be varying opinions. And I've already heard a lot of varying opinions on Pete Alonso and his future status at the New York Mets. So drop your comments in the comment section down below. And make sure you're following me on all my social media platforms. For more podcast updates and for more Mets talk at CPNY Sports, you know where to find me on X and Instagram. Without further ado, let's talk about some New York Mets baseball. The shallow right field, stumbling start to Stewart. It comes up, it's crossed to deep left pitch by Alvarez, and that's just going 4 straight games for the second time in his he's home. All right, so let's get into it. A little bit of a disclaimer. This is part 2 of the Pete Alonso contract extension talks on my channel. When I first started my channel under a different channel name, I'm going to link it down in the description below. I dropped my initial Pete Alonso contract extension projections and reasonings behind those projections, as well as the same figure here you all see with the other first baseman and what they're making around the league. So make sure you go check out that video. I can confidently say my projections in that video are the same exact projection that I have here, fast forwarding to January 3rd of this new year in 2024. Before we get into it, like I said, this is a very subjective topic. I like to keep things open-ended and I like to engage with you all as viewers. So here's my main question to you all up front. I provide a little bit of context with what the other first basemen are making here around the league. You can see Freddie Freeman all the way down to Anthony Rizzo. My question to you all before we talk about Pete Alonso's statistics and a little bit about my opinions in terms of these contract extensions. Would you all be willing to give Pete Alonso $30 million a year, given what you see on your screen here? I'll leave the screen up here in a second or for a second, and I want you all to sort of start thinking about your own projections before I fast forward a couple slides and give my own projections and what they are for Pete Alonso contract. So make sure you all read it. Read it good. Freddie Freeman, objectively one of the best all-around hitters, is making $27 million a year. Paul Goldschmidt, former MVP, is making $26 million a year. And Matt Olson, obviously signing that extension with the Braves before the beginning of last season, had a monster season, is making $22 million a year. All right, now you saw the screen. Let's talk about Pete Alonso's career statistics before I give my thoughts and opinions about the Pete Alonso situation. Here are his career numbers in his short 5-year career so far with the New York Mets. An all-star in 3 of the 5 years. You see down below 2019, 2022, and most recently in 2023. He does have a career batting average of 251. Slugging percentage has been great, well above league average for the entirety of his career. OPS, same thing at 870. K rate is absolutely phenomenal for Pete Alonso, given how good of a power bat he is, how many home runs he hits. Obviously, when you talk about high power hitters, home run hitters, usually the K percentage and the strikeouts go hand in hand. But with Pete Alonso, he's really been able to sort of mitigate that over the course of his career. League average K percentage is around 22.1%, and Pete Alonso for his career is hovering at 22.3%. Just a great overall metric for Pete Alonso and sort of just describing the type of hitter that he is. 17.3 WAR, whether you like that statistic or not, has been accumulated in 20 or over the course of his 5-year career. Now for 2023, obviously a lot of people talk about Pete Alonso's .217 batting average, but nobody talks about that his power numbers did not take a dip at all. And we all know that. It's obvious. We saw the type of season that Pete Alonso's had. If you watch the Mets on a consistent basis in 2023, he still showed you why he's one of the best, if not the best, pure power hitters in the entirety of the MLB. Right up there with Ohtani, right up there with Judge is Pete Alonso. And I forgot who dropped their list of top 10 power hitters that left Pete Alonso off there, which is highly disrespectful. I think it was either ESPN or BR Walkoff, Bleacher Report Walkoff. That's absolutely ridiculous. Pete Alonso is a top 3 power hitter in the game of baseball. He hit 46 home runs in 2023, 118 RBIs. OPS was still over 800 at 820. I don't know what more you could want. Slugging percentage was also there, north of 500, north of league average. Pete Alonso has proven to us year in and year out that his power is not going anywhere. And he's entering the prime of his career at 29 years old at the same time that these contract extension talks are taking place. Now, I know a lot of people talk about Pete Alonso's defense. Listen, I think he's a serviceable first baseman. He's not a first baseman that's going to ever win a gold glove. I can confidently say that. I know that was probably the expectation, not only for Mets fans, but from Pete Alonso himself in terms of improving his defense from what we saw when he was still coming up in the minor league farm system, but he's serviceable out there. I haven't looked at any of the advanced stats, I must admit to that, but when I look at his overall defensive game, like I said, serviceable is the word that comes to mind. But his bat, who's replicating those power numbers around the league? Not many people. Not many people. So here are my thoughts and opinions on Pete Alonso. Yes, I do want Pete Alonso in a Mets uniform. And I will state that up front first and foremost. But there's a lot of factors that go into these negotiations, especially when you look at the type of offseason the Mets are having right now and where they view this team in terms of building that foundation and stabilizing this organization for 2024, 2025, and beyond. That directly impacts the negotiations with Pete Alonso. But I do firmly believe that a contract extension will get done. And I also do firmly believe, whether you agree with it or not, that when it's all said and done, regardless of who gives Pete Alonso this contract, whether it's an extension with the Mets or whether he signs it elsewhere in free agency, if the Mets don't find a trade partner before that for Pete Alonso, he's going to be the highest paid first baseman in the game of baseball. Whether it's $28 million, $29 million, or $30 million, like I had in the original slide, he is going to top Freddie Freeman's AAV. And the reason why I say it's not realistic and why I don't think it's realistic to compare Pete Alonso's contract to the likes of Freddie Freeman, like I said, Freddie Freeman was 32 years old when he signed that contract with the Dodgers, not in the prime of his career, or I should say in the later stages of the prime of his career. For as good as he still is, that's the fact. Matt Olson signed that team-friendly deal. Pete Alonso's not going to sign a team-friendly deal with the New York Mets. Regardless of what he says to the New York media, that he loves being a Met and wants to be here for the rest of his career. He's not forfeiting millions of dollars like Matt Olson did. So it's not reasonable to compare those contracts to a contract that Pete Alonso is going to be asking for. And that's another factor within itself. What is Pete Alonso asking for? Nobody really concretely knows. But he hired Scott Boras for a reason. The same reason why Brandon Nimmo got what he got above his market value when the Mets ended up re-signing him. Scott Boras is not going to leave millions of dollars on the table for his clients. So, Mets fans, if you're in the business of penny pinching, that tactic is not going to work if you want to see Pete Alonso in a Mets uniform for the foreseeable future. Now, another aspect is this bridge year that we keep talking about, that I've talked about on this podcast, that I've talked about on Interstate Mets Report, that I've talked about on the Mets Hot Stove Lives with Talking Mets with Rob. Where do the Mets view themselves especially with this core that they're already invested in, that they've already invested in outside of Pete Alonso. Francisco Lindor, you have for another 8 years. Brandon Nimmo, you have for another 7 years. Edwin Diaz, you have for another 4 to 5 years. Jeff McNeil, you have for another 3 to 4 years. Do you think, as the viewers, that core can win the Mets a championship? Because that's the exact same question this front office has to answer for itself in terms of analyzing what the best path forward is for Pete Alonso's future with the Mets. Now, David Stearns already said it once, and he didn't only say it once, he doubled down and said it twice, that Pete Alonso is going to be the New York Mets' 2024 opening day first baseman. That's the expectation. But you have to think, with the way this Mets roster is currently shaking out, with their unwillingness to pursue these top-end free agents outside of Yoshinobu Yamamoto for the 2024 season, if the Mets are not anywhere near contention for a wild card spot, because forget about the division, we're talking about the wild card spot. If they're out of the race and teams start calling for Pete Alonso, the Mets are going to pick up the phone. They did so last trade deadline. That's a well-known fact, and they will do it again. Now, that's not saying the Mets are going to pull the trigger on a trade for Pete Alonso, even if they're out of contention. But everything's at the table. Everything's on the table at that point. So, like I said, my projection for Pete Alonso, 8 years, $240 million. That is the sweet spot. And happens to be the absolute most that I would go for Pete Alonso, making him the highest paid first baseman at $30 million AAV for Pete Alonso. Now, I know some people have stated that it's way too high. Spotrac has him at around $28.25 million. So that's why I wanted you all to start thinking about this at the top of this podcast episode, what you all think your projections would be. Because I'm giving you mine here. And it's the same projection that I projected him at back in May of 2023 when I dropped that first podcast episode talking Pete Alonso's contract extension. 8 years, $240 million. Get it done. Get it done. Anything north of that, if the asking price is anywhere north of that from Pete Alonso's camp and Scott Boras, I'm sorry, there are different discussions that need to be had. Because that's getting into egregious and unrealistic territory. You're talking about highest paid first baseman of all time at that point, with the likes of Miguel Cabrera at $32.5 million a year. And that's not feasible. That's not going to fly. Pete Alonso is absolutely phenomenal, but not for anything more than $30 million a year. So like I said, those are my opinions. I want to hear what you all, the audience, have to think about that. It's very hard to come up here and talk about Pete Alonso projections and talk about the latest and greatest news surrounding Pete Alonso because there hasn't been jack squat surrounding the Pete Alonso front with the New York Mets. Mark Feinsand, I think the last report on a Pete Alonso extension was Mark Feinsand back on August 30th, stating that the Mets formally made an offer to Pete Alonso that wasn't insulting, which is good, I guess, but it wasn't anywhere near the type of contract that would make Pete Alonso and his camp think twice about hitting free agency and playing free agency out. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of that there's still a gap between the two sides. Now, how large is that gap? I guess we'll find out shortly. I'm still hopeful that a contract extension will happen this offseason. But like I said, it's not as clear-cut as everyone wants to make it out to be. There's a lot of external factors now at play, not only analyzing Pete Alonso as a player and the talent that he brings you, but where this organization is going, what vision they have for 2024, 2025, and beyond. Because we're already starting to see that sort of vision mold with the decisions that the Mets have been making and David Stearns has been making this offseason. So like I said, 8 years, $240 million, get it done. Highest paid first baseman. Anything north of that, no can do. Hopefully, the Mets get it done. I love Pete Alonso. I want to see him in a Mets uniform, but at the right price, at a reasonable price. Comment your thoughts and opinions. Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the True Mets Talk podcast. I thoroughly appreciate the support. Like I said, this was a very subjective topic. Wanted to keep it open for interpretation. I love healthy debates. Comment your thoughts and opinions about your own projections and about the state of this New York Mets team as it pertains to a potential Pete Alonso contract extension. Drop those comments. Hit those thumbs up if you like the podcast. If you like what you're hearing and want to hear more, hit that thumbs up. It helps the podcast grow and get me to 400 subscribers. I thoroughly appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed to the channel just yet, bottom right-hand corner as you're watching, hover over the icon and hit that subscribe button. You know where to find me on all my social media handles. We'll be back with more Mets news and Mets rumors as more information comes out. Interstate Mets Report will be going live this Friday. Time TBD. It's either going to be 3:30 p.m. or 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Nelson and I will be going live to talk about the latest and greatest news surrounding this Mets team. Stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for more podcast episodes on the Truth Mets Talk podcast. And with that, it's your boy CP. Let's go Mets. I'm out. Thank you for watching the latest episode of the CP New York Sports Pod. If you enjoyed this content, make sure you hit that thumbs up, comment your thoughts and opinions, and use the lower right-hand button of this video to subscribe to the channel. Thank you.